How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
You weren't alone, especially like you're not thrown in first time. I think just as to kind of clear any misconceptions about how like these cases with massive stakes are tried, you do have this team and you can various people, various senior like experience levels, I guess, on those teams.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I had my direct boss who was involved in that as well. I had my investigator who was involved. I was working with a psychologist as well for the Children's Advocacy Center here in Dallas.
Yeah.
I mean, I was bringing in all the pieces I could. And again, this is where being a trial lawyer sometimes feels like being the conductor of the symphony.
Yeah,
you're
right.
playing all these different pieces who are all kind of doing their own thing. You're trying to make sure that the music all sounds beautiful and cohesive and comes together in this perfect moment. But yeah, it's not a journey of just like myself doing this. There's no way. I would be wildly unsuccessful if it was just me. Yeah. And I think we both know we're so much better when we work with other people, build with other people, and really create these relationships. I know both you and me are very fond of the idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that's exactly what happened in that situation, because I was seeing success as a child abuse prosecutor, but as a result, so was my investigator, because they were seeing the good things that were coming from him. He was getting lots of validation from people. And so, yes, it was improving my standing in the office, but it was also improving his standing in the office. And so we can work together to benefit one another and actually bring about better results. And not only did it help me and help him, it helped victims of these crimes, because we found just a steady stream of success.
Yeah. No, I think that's such an important point. And the peer-to-peer learning that goes on, the support and the accountability and all of that from the group that you learn with. So important. So let's talk again, going more tactical. What did so you've got a big case coming up. That one is 2 weeks. Like, was that a very short time frame? Was that like about normal? That was quite short. Okay.
That was quite short. Most of the time you were generally working up a case on a bare minimum a month out. Some of them you would have a couple months. It would kind of depend. Some of them you would see immediately it's going to trial because it's a bad case. You're never going to settle it. Whether it's bad because it's a tough case to win, or it's just the person needs to go to prison for a really long time. You're identifying those. I mean, I had one that came into my office one time, and the first moment I read it, instead of giving a plea recommendation, I just wrote trial. And told the defense attorney, we're going to trial on this. It was so horrific that there was no offer I was going to make that they would ever take. So it was just obvious we're just going to have to go to trial. A jury will find this person guilty. He's going to go to prison for the rest of his life. That's how it has to be. So sometimes you have cases like that and you can figure that out pretty early.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's about a month out. And then it really is the last 2 weeks though, where everything ramps up and all of you just kind of tunnel vision into that case and are trying to get through that.
And so in those 4 to 2 weeks, you've got case law to review, you've got the actual law to review, you've got discovery, you've got evidence to go through, you've got testimony, lots of prep that needs to go into, right? And then obviously just you planning your approach. So talk us through a little bit of what like a practice regime looks like tactically. I mean, you still have to sleep in that, you still have to eat, and so what does it look like day to day in those few weeks?
Organized chaos would probably be the easiest way to describe it. It's papers everywhere, files everywhere, going through everything. So, and this is just my personal approach, is I try to stick as much information in my head as quickly as possible, and then let my subconscious work on things and start connecting those dots. And so obviously I'm preparing different ideas. I'm strategizing through my head, all the different ways the trial could play out. And the big thing is you're trying to prepare your witnesses before trial. That's by those last couple of weeks, it is just really trying to get them on board. Make sure they're ready, make sure they're prepared, make sure they're going to be able to testify. And not testify, I was always of the opinion, my job was not to tell them what to testify to. It was just to help them get comfortable so they could tell the truth. To understand the idea is to tell the truth. Whatever that truth is, it is. I'm not here to make it up. I don't care what it is. So it was just a matter of working with them to get them comfortable so that they could get up there and actually testify, understand how it's going to play out. You're working with your investigator, you're working with your victim advocate, you're working with tons of people to make sure everybody's ready to go. You're filing lots of motions to make sure all the paperwork is documented correctly. You're having discussions with defense attorneys about, are we going to plea it? What's he thinking? Are we going to actually go to trial? Are you going to file a motion for continuance? I've got to make sure all my witnesses are available so I don't file a motion for continuance. It's just like, again, organized chaos where you're trying to study the case, study the law, file your motions, talk to witnesses, talk to defense attorney, game plan, strategize, listen to any new evidence that comes in, talk to your detective, really make sure they're ready. I mean, it's just a lot of moving pieces. And there's no way to say one case looks a certain way because each one's different. And you're doing a lot of pitching with your colleagues too, to make sure, hey, what do you think about this idea? How does this sound? Would you handle this way? What would your witness order be? Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Let me talk to you about why. And so you're just getting as much feedback as possible too, and trying to sift through what is useful feedback and what feedback needs to be disregarded. And then you're working with the judge to make sure the judge, because there's multiple cases set every week, you're trying to work with the judge so that if you're actually ready to go, your case gets to go. So you're kind of planting that seed with them and kind of playing the inception game with the judge and playing it with the defense attorney and trying to work with other prosecutors who maybe have cases and try to get them to move their case to a different court if you really want to practice in front of that judge. So it's just like, again, it's organized chaos where there's so many pieces moving. And you just feel like your brain is running at the, if you've ever heard like when your laptop starts, the fan starts going and it sounds like it's going to take off. That's what it feels like sometimes in your head, because it feels like, man, there's just too much stuff going on, but that's really what it takes. And trying to keep all those pieces straight is another thing that really separates a great trial lawyer from a not so great, is understanding how to do that. Because one of the things you'll find a lot of people complain about is not being able to get to trial. And they say, well, the judge didn't get me to trial this week. Well, they didn't take the steps. They didn't take the steps necessary to get there.
Right.
They didn't set it up. They weren't talking to the judge. They weren't making sure their defense attorney was being pushed to be ready for trial. They weren't talking to other prosecutors to find homes in other courts for their cases. They weren't doing these steps that you have to do to actually go to trial. Like I was in courts where the judge notoriously didn't ever go to trial. And people for years before I got in there wouldn't go to trial in that court because the judge would always find a way to get out of it. I never had any issue. I tried so many cases in front of these judges because I understood how to work the system and get my cases in front of them, because it's important to try them. That's the only way they get resolved. And so a lot of people just don't understand that it's not just about being good when you're actually in trial. It's about being good at every piece of what a trial lawyer involves. And that's also getting your case to actually be heard in a trial. And that was a huge mistake people had everywhere I went.
Having a really good system to organize yourself, a productivity system or project management system, sounds like another important skill to add to that ability. Okay, so was there ever a point where you felt like quitting, and how did you get through that?
Yeah, for sure. There was definitely a point where you feel like that. I think for me, that point probably came where I didn't lose a case, but we ended up in a hung jury. A hung jury means the jury was split. So in this case, 7 of them were for guilty, 5 were for not guilty. And you have to have a unanimous verdict, which meant the case got dismissed, a mistrial was called, and we would have to retry the case. And I was so frustrated in this case because the judge had just absolutely overstepped the law and had completely taken out my legs in this trial. And it was solely because she didn't like the victim. She just hated the victim. The moment he walked in, this judge was against that victim and wanted nothing to do with it. I mean, it was obvious when I was being asked, why did you even bring this case to me? I brought the case because the victim had been stabbed and was in the ICU for multiple weeks. And the defendant had also stabbed another person in that same day and put them into the ICU for multiple weeks. So I said, this case is worth it, even though my victims were not the best people. And I remember talking to everybody in our office, our appellate division, our first assistant, tons of other lawyers, and every single one backed up my position that this should have come in. We should have been able to talk about this, that the case should have run smoothly. And instead it didn't, purely because the judge hated the victim. And that was probably the biggest moment where I was like, this sucks. Like, this is not how it's supposed to be. A judge should not wield this much power to destroy a case solely because they don't like the victim.
Right.
That was probably the toughest one, where I was really just discouraged in the justice system.
Yeah, I can totally see how that's demotivating. What do you think got you through that? Was there one moment or one person or something that helped you get over that?
I talked to a couple other lawyers in our office. I think that was probably the key, is they just said, yeah, that was a really poor decision on her part. It shouldn't have been done that way, but you still didn't lose the case. So we still had the case. And they just kind of encouraged me to get back on the horse and try again. And maybe not that specific case right away, because it takes months to get that case back on the trial docket, but to get onto something else. And I did, and saw good results again. And so kind of worked through that on my own. But for probably 2 weeks or so, it was pretty rough and discouraging, where I was like, I just don't understand the point if a judge is going to destroy my case just because they don't like the victim. And I get it. Like, the victims in this case, they were bad. Like, they were not good people. They had criminal records. They were not fine citizens of Dallas County, but it didn't matter. That wasn't what my mandate was, right? The mandate was to do justice, and justice for the two people who had been stabbed for no reason. So that one hurt, but ultimately talking to a couple of the mentors that I've built and friends in the office encouraged me to continue pushing on, and ultimately I did. And then shortly thereafter, I got moved to child abuse, and that was really a big game changer for me, because I love that challenge and that unit, because you got to see real change in the lives of these children. Like, that transformation they went through in the time that you would work with them, and they would actually see that there is hope, that there is justice, encourages you a lot as a person, as a trial attorney. So that was fortunate for me that I got to get to that place fairly soon after.
Huge well of motivation, I'm sure, from that. So you talked about the role some friends in your office played. What role did family play in this as your journey kind of developed and you were developing the skill?
So family, they were always very proud of the decision to be this trial lawyer, and especially be a prosecutor. So they enjoyed listening to the stories, and they were always there to hear what I had to say and give me feedback and things of that nature. They probably didn't do as much to push me in the growth of my skill set as did mentors and friends in the office, just because it was a little bit out of their depth, which in a lot of ways I actually respect that decision to acknowledge it was a little bit out of their depth and push me to rely more heavily on people who were familiar with what I was doing.
Yeah.
Because they understood I can't offer you the help that you need other than the feedback when you're pitching ideas to me as like a normal person. Let me give you feedback onto this. And so I think there's a real value in people understanding their strengths and weaknesses and having kind of the courage to say, this isn't my area that I can help you with. So like, I'm always happy to listen.
Yeah.
Hear what you have to say, but I don't want to give you any guidance on some of this stuff, because that isn't where I can help you the most. And so for my family, I appreciated that, because they didn't try to overstep and steer me in a poor direction. They really let me run the show and rely on the people who are in this field and in this industry to give me that guidance.
So this is a really interesting question, and I've been really surprised and pleasantly surprised by all the responses, because I think this is a common thing for people, and that your family very often doesn't know the details about the path that you've chosen in life, the skill that you've chosen to master. On the previous episode, Nate was saying how, he thought it was maybe ignorance on the part of his parents that allowed him to kind of continue doing this. And he sort of like corrected himself, and he's like, I don't know if it's ignorance. And I suggested that, maybe ignorance is very easy to confuse, or rather unconditional love is easy to confuse as ignorance, right? And that's actually what's going on there, where, like you say, they know they don't know, enough to like get involved and help, but they would, supported your decision and helped you however they could, just like you said, by listening. So I think that's such a key role. Yeah. Okay, so last question here. So as you kind of kept getting better at this, what were some ways that you measured your improvement? I think you mentioned a few, like obviously winning cases, getting feedback from your bosses, from your colleagues, anything else, maybe internal as well, that you use to kind of measure like, okay, I'm getting pretty good at this.
Yeah, I mean, there were a number, and I don't know how much of it will be internal. A lot of it's still external validation, but after every trial I would talk to jury members. And so they were always giving me feedback. So that was one way to figure out that what I was doing was working. Additionally, when you're actually delivering things to a jury, you're reading how they're responding. And I went from juries paying attention to what I was saying to juries crying and juries almost trying to leap out of their chairs to attack defendants over what I was saying. So you started seeing visceral reactions from what I was doing, which for me, as we're talking about creating emotion, clearly means I'm onto something. So like I was getting feedback from their actual bodily responses. That was a huge one. I also started having a lot more attorneys in our offices coming to me for feedback and advice and ways to try things because they were seeing the results that I was having. I started having really close relationships with people very high up in our office who most people weren't getting access to because of the way I was approaching things. So I started getting a lot of external feedback like that. Additionally, during this time, I started teaching at SMU Law School and coaching the national mock trial team. And this is where I really got to start working with, is my philosophy something that can be taught? And by taught, I mean to non-lawyers, because the law students aren't lawyers. Lawyers can understand, if you're a trial lawyer, you can generally understand some of the things I'm doing. You may not get the whole picture, but you can at least take some of it. With law students, I need to see, they don't have the legal background. They don't understand what a trial looks like. Can I teach them? And so I started teaching and saw really great results the first year. But obviously anybody knows 1 year that could just be a fluke. You could just have a really great group of students who, for whatever reason, it resonates with them. So I wanted to make sure I validated what I was doing. And the second year, that year really took off, and all my students ended up sweeping all of the awards at SMU Law School for all the speaking categories. That was a moment that I was like, okay, there's really something here, because now it's not just lawyers validating it, it's law students, it's other people judging these competitors if they're on my national mock trial team, and started seeing, oh, okay, there's something that not only do I understand, not only can I teach it to lawyers, but I can also teach it to law students, and they can implement these ideas. I think that was the big moment where I said, the validation is there, and it's time to kind of move forward with a larger audience.
Yeah.